Imagine that you work as a secretary for an executive for 9 long years, and when you decide to resign to focus on building a family, your boss realizes how much you're missed. So the man becomes determined to win you over and make you stay, whether it's romantically by becoming his partner or just a work colleague. Either way, he just wants you to work for him, and for that, he's even willing to marry you. Will the man's attempts to win you over make you stay in your job, or will it work and you'll become a couple? I'm Nina, and in today's recap we'll be watching What's Wrong with Secretary Kim. The story opens with Miso, better known as Secretary Kim, who everyone recognizes as such because she works for a vice president of a company. The man is very famous, successful, and handsome. We see Miso doing her job every day for 9 years, waking up at 5 a.m., preparing the vice president's clothes and accompanying him on all his tasks, in and out of the office, being a loyal right-hand man to her boss and, as a result, not having a personal life as successful as her work. Young Jun is known for being a very objective executive who doesn't give his employees second chances. The man also sometimes uses the method of humiliating and repressing, believing that this is the best way for a person to learn, but it was only Miso who made this way of the vice president a daily fuel for improvement. One evening, Secretary Kim decided to tell her boss, after an event, that he should find her another secretary, as she intended to leave the company soon. The conversation went very smoothly, Miso knowing how to bring up a subject that would be difficult to have in a very pleasant tone, and Young Jun just accepted it at first. However, as soon as he got home, the vice president couldn't sleep properly, and this subject would terrify him for a long time. The next day, the news has already spread around the company and CRA wants to apply to take Secretary Kim's place. She's an employee who works in the vice president's office and thinks she's one of the best people for the role. However, I don't think she has any idea that Miso works every day, and when I say every day, I mean weekends and the night shift too. Young Jun decides for the first time in a long time that he's not going to have lunch with his secretary Kim and goes to his friend President Park to talk about it and maybe get some advice on how to get Miso to stay with the company. Yusik believes that it's the 9-year crisis. The man talks about the crises in a relationship, which are 3, 6, and 9 years. However, this theory applies to married couples, but he thinks there could be an exception and he could fit into this situation, since his wife spends most of her time with the vice president. President Park experienced the crises with his ex-wife, and when it reached 9 years, they ended up separating. Young Jun understood what his friend was trying to tell him and is looking for a solution if this is the problem. The vice president calls her to go to his house for lunch, and when they arrive, Young Jun tells her that he doesn't give second chances, but that he'll make an exception for her. The man offers Miso the position of director, says he'll buy her a house with his personal money, that he'll pay off the debts in her family, and before Secretary Kim can say anything, the man's parents interrupt them and call them to lunch. Later, when Miso is alone with his mother, the woman says that she would like her son to meet someone like Secretary Kim. She even wants it to be herself, and this makes Miso feel a little embarrassed. As they leave, Secretary Kim tells Young Jun that she still wants to leave the company, even after the great offer she received, and the vice president can't believe it. He was convinced that this would make her stay. In the next scene we see Miso with her sisters. The woman has helped a lot with their studies, and it seems that Miso is always solving her family's problems, like the girl's father who owed money to loan sharks. To solve this case, Secretary Kim sold her car, which she had won from the vice president for being 10 minutes late for the bus, and paid off the debt. Miso has a pollen allergy, and it's a really bad one, where you sneeze all the time and your eyes water. With this information, we move on to the next scene, where Young Jun once again goes to President Park to talk, since the solution he had found didn't solve his problem. Yusik thinks that his secretary, Kim, might be taking a liking to his friend and, for the vice president, this might make sense. He starts to think that Miso was upset the night she resigned because she had to buy flowers for the man to give to another woman. However, as we learned earlier, Secretary Kim's eyes were teary because of her allergy. Miso tells her sisters that she has the feeling that if she doesn't leave the company right now, she thinks she'll stay there forever. Their conversation is interrupted when Secretary Kim receives a call from the vice president asking her to come to the company. As she's getting ready to leave, the woman comes across a spider and starts to have a panic attack. Miso has a phobia of spiders. As soon as she arrives at the appointed place, Secretary Kim gets into the car in which Young Jun is waiting for her, and inside the vehicle her pollen allergy kicks in, as the vice president presents her with a bouquet of flowers. The man gives Miso half a day off to rest and discovers that her biggest motivation for leaving the company is to find her own life. When asked what that means, the woman replies that she doesn't want to be anyone's secretary or a member of anyone's family, just Miso's life. This keeps Young Jun awake at night. The man doesn't understand how she can say that the time they spent together wasn't part of her life. The next day, Miso is able to sleep a little more, and when she goes to the company to interview a candidate to take her place, the vice president and she start arguing indirectly, throwing things like, "You have to know that when you come in, you'll let your identity be erased and you'll simply become a secretary," into the air. In the end, Young Jun decided to hire the woman and asked Miso to make her a copy of himself. Before leaving, the man asked her what it meant to find her own life, and Secretary Kim explained that for the past 9 years she's just been working tirelessly and now she just wants to find some time for herself. Then she intends to find someone, date and get married, bearing in mind that she's already 29. In the evening at her home, Miso prepared an instruction manual for her new secretary and added a message for her to remember to take time for herself. Later, the vice president shows up at her house and asks her to marry him, so that she can get married the way she wants to and continue doing her job the way he wants her to. Miso refuses the proposal, and Young Jun believes that she may have had this reaction because she was expecting something more elaborate, so the man sets to work on it. The next day, Secretary Kim starts training the woman who will replace her. Her name is Ga. Miso explains to her all the schedules that the woman will have to memorize, and that it is of the utmost importance that she records that the vice president must not have cable ties near him. Secretary Kim is dismissed early that day because the vice president has no other commitments, so he goes to have his meal with President Park. And the man advises his friend on the decision he's made to ask his wife to marry him, saying that it's like when you want to buy a company, you have to conquer it. And the first step is to start dating, not jumping straight into marriage. In the evening, Miso meets the office staff at a restaurant to drink and celebrate Ga joining the company. It's not such a formal dinner, since the vice president isn't there. But not for long, as the man soon surprises everyone by turning up. Of course, it's not an establishment at the level Young Jun is used to, since when he orders a whiskey he discovers that only soju and beer are served in the place, but the man makes an effort to be there. Afterwards, the group goes to a cheap karaoke bar nearby, but that's too much for the vice president and he reserves the whole place for them to sing and have fun. Young Jun has started to make an effort to be more attentive and win Miso's heart, so he gets her some food and serves her drinks. During the singing, Sarah drank a lot and got a bit carried away, which led her to make a fool of herself in front of everyone. But even worse, it involved her boss. The woman couldn't control the envy she was feeling towards her new secretary, so she stood up and grabbed the microphone from her hand, then started mocking the way she was singing and saying things like, "What's missing for you to want me as your vice president's secretary, since I'm better than Miso and Ga." To finish on a high note, when the men tried to get her to calm down, Sarah ended up letting go and falling into Young Jun's lap. That was the end of the team dinner, and the vice president took his secretary Kim home. Before Miso entered the house, he asked her if she had noticed how attentive the man had been today and that now Young Jun would do it every day. He would even let Secretary Kim date him. However, the woman refuses and says something the vice president thought he would never hear, that he's not her type. After entering the house, the man is still outside and starts texting her. Young Jun says she doesn't understand how there isn't something about him that makes her dislike him, given that the man is handsome, rich and so on. Miso is amazed at how narcissistic he can be, and at the same time as she receives messages from her boss, her sister sends her some asking her to send hearts from a game so that the woman can continue playing. Secretary Kim ends up expressing her feelings about how hard it was to serve him 24 hours a day, and the man says that he only gave her all this responsibility because Miso never denied him anything. The woman then says that she just wants an ordinary romance with an ordinary person and asks him if it wouldn't be impossible for him to live a romance, since he only admires himself. The messages that his sister sends come in the middle of the conversation, and Miso sends the hearts to stop her, but it turns out that they have been sent to the vice president. The next day at work, the man changes his attitude towards his secretary Kim and picks on her for every little mistake GA makes, since she's the one training the woman. And we see that when Young-jun calls the replacement secretary into his office, he tells her to pretend she's being trained to replace Miso. In the next scene, Secretary Kim is having dinner with some friends, and one of them comments that a friend of her husband's is interested after seeing a photo of Miso on social media, so her friend is in charge of arranging a blind date. They then receive a questionnaire, and if they agree to answer it, they will win a dish from the restaurant. We later see that only they received the questionnaire, because Young-jun is involved in it. The questions were about what they would like their first date with a man to be like, what they would like to do, what they would like to get as a present, and so on. The next day, the answers come in the form of events. President Park asks Miso to meet him at an amusement park, and when the woman arrives at the place, there is no one there but her, but suddenly the lights come on and the place seems to come alive. Whose Secretary Kim ends up meeting there is Young-jun, and the two of them spend the night having fun on the rides. The part that Miso liked the most was the carousel, because when she was little she was never allowed to go on it because her parents didn't have enough money for their 3 daughters, so it was always the other 2 who went. The vice president ended up talking a bit about his older brother. When he was in 4th grade, Young-jun was the youngest in the class, because they moved him up a class because he was so smart, and that made the other kids want to beat him up. And according to the man, the worst with him was his older brother, who was also in the same class. Then the two of them went on a boat, and in the middle of the trip, the vice principal arranged for there to be a fireworks display, and Miso loved it. The man even became more humanized by taking off his coat and giving it to the woman. However, the charm wore off at the end of the night when Miso realized that he had only followed what she had written on the questionnaire, and despite his good intentions, it wasn't genuine. All the things that Secretary Kim had written down were fulfilled, only one of which was missing, which was to say goodbye to the person you've been on a date with a kiss on their doorstep, like a scene from a movie. Apparently, Young-jun was willing to do this, but Miso put the huge stuffed cow she had won in the middle of them and went home. It's only the next day that Secretary Kim notices that inside the little cow's purse there's a present with a beautiful necklace that the man bought for her. Miso puts it around her neck, and Young-jun admires her with the jewel throughout the day, but without her noticing. Today the blind date that her friend had set up for her will take place, and when the substitute secretary lets slip to the vice principal that the woman will be going on a date, the man goes to President Park to talk. Young-jun is perplexed as to how Secretary Kim had the nerve to wear the necklace he bought for her with another man, but at the same time the deputy director tries to reassure himself that the date he prepared for her was incredible, and that it won't live up to expectations. And that's more or less what happens. The man's manner makes her feel embarrassed, and the place he's chosen for the two of them to have dinner is too noisy and cramped. But sometimes a photo taken at the right moment can make things seem more than they really are, and this happens to Miso. When the man is cleaning something around his neck, a company employee takes a photo because she recognizes Secretary Kim and sends it to everyone in her department. The picture ends up reaching President Park, who shows it to Young-jun, causing the man to lose the confidence he had in his plan. Returning to the meeting, Miso asks the man to do some research into a case of children who went missing for a period in the 1990s, and he promises that he will do everything he can to find something. The meeting was really disastrous, but at the end of it, the man expresses his feelings of wanting to meet her again one day, and when he goes to reply, the woman notices that his tie is crooked, so out of habit, Secretary Kim ends up fixing it. At this point Young-jun arrives at the place and doesn't like the scene in front of him, so he hurries to end the meeting and acts like a jealous person. The next day, the vice president has a panic attack inside the company. The new secretary has put cable ties to organize the man's computer wires and hasn't remembered the advice she received on the first day. Secretary Kim didn't say it was the newcomer and took responsibility for the mistake, but as they left the room, she reminded the woman that she shouldn't use the object in any way around Young Jun and had to have an even more serious conversation when she asked if the man hadn't overreacted. In the end, Miso says that it will be okay if GA lends her the book he got before the launch from his favorite writer. Things calm down and the company's athletic competition begins. Secretary Kim wins every category she's entered in, and once again the vice president is jealous to see her with her body attached to another man, no matter how necessary it is for the activity. When Young Jun gets up, he hurts his ankle, and now there's a little gossip between us. It's not clear whether he really hurt it or did it to get Miso's attention, but either way it works, so the two of them go to his house before the end of the competitions to put ice on the injured part. At the house, the man doesn't want to take off his sock to apply the ice pack, but Secretary Kim still tries to take it off and ends up seeing that the man has a very deep scar. Young Jun quickly covers her up again and changes the subject to lighten the mood. The man comments on how close she came to her partner, whom she didn't even know, in the race, even though it was necessary for them to win, and the woman says that he couldn't complain, since he said he would only accept first place. Then, since Miso wasn't bothered by having someone so close to her, the vice president starts to get closer and closer and accidentally pulls her towards him. Secretary Kim gets off the vice president's back when she hears the compress bag fall to the floor. When she returns to the room with more ice in it, she realizes that the man has fallen asleep. Young Jun has a nightmare in which a woman in red heels is calling him and he wakes up terrified. So the man asks Miso if she could sleep in the guest room like she did the other times, because he doesn't want to be alone tonight. However, the vice president soon drops the offer, after receiving a call from his brother telling him that he wants to see him. When Miso leaves Young Jun's residence and goes to his house, she bumps into his brother, not knowing who he is. The man found the woman beautiful right away. In the next scene we see the brothers talking. Sung-yeon says that he has decided to make this contact with the youngest because he has decided to forgive him for something that happened in their childhood, and we see that the vice president doesn't like his words very much, so he asks the man to leave and walks out of the room. The next day there's a lot of work to be done at the company. A group that competes in the market with the vice president's business is also preparing to open an art center and has decided to move up the opening to get more visibility than Young Jun's business. So in order not to be left behind, the vice president also postpones the opening of his art center, and now his employees will have to work hard to get everything ready for the opening. At the library, a small problem occurs while the man and his secretary Kim are visiting. The energy in the place goes down, and to pass the time, Miso chooses a novel, which she says is her favorite, to read. Young Jun ends up enjoying their time together in the library and doesn't even mind the blackout. Later, we see the man at her house and he's even picked up that book she said she liked to read. Secretary Kim is busy for the next few days thinking of a writer who could put on a big event to draw attention to the library they are going to open, and Miso thinks of Morpheus, a writer whose identity has not yet been revealed. So the woman writes an email to the writer and waits for his reply. Young Jun's brother decides that he's going to visit him in his office, and so that the man doesn't meet Miso, the vice president asks her to take the stairs through the building and go to a snack bar to buy a bunch of things. However, Young Jun didn't expect that the woman and her brother would accidentally bump into each other in the reception area, and at the very moment they do, they remember that they had bumped into each other before. Sung-yeon asks for Kim's secretary's number so that they can keep in touch, but the woman gives her a false contact and rushes off to the office with all those purchases. Miso even jokes to herself while waiting for the elevator, that if that man were Morpheus, the writer of the moment who writes about novels, she would even pass on his number, and little does she know that Sung-yeon, it's really him. Young Jun's mother invites her secretary Kim to meet her. The woman presents Miso with a gift and reveals that her aim was to find out if her son was in a good mood so that he could be invited to a family dinner at her house. Secretary Kim believes that the man has no reason to refuse, but when his mother asks him, Young Jun says straight away that he'll be busy. So the man's mother finds another way to get him to come to her house. The woman purposely forgets her purse on Miso's desk and says that she only wants her son to take her there in the evening. Young Jun ends up doing what his mother wanted, and after dinner, his older brother comes to talk to him. The man talks as if he wants to meet Secretary Kim, since their mother spoke so highly of her at dinner. However, the vice president keeps his mouth shut, and Sung-yeon insinuates that because the youngest doesn't say anything, he's afraid that the eldest will end up dating Miso. The two end up arguing about something that happened between them a long time ago, and in the end, Young Jun says that he doesn't hate his older brother, but that he despises him. Sung-yeon stands up and retorts that if it weren't for what the younger brother did at the time, he would be the one in the position of vice president. And Young Jun replies that his brother is weak and prefers to hurt people in order to get ahead, that even if that accident hadn't happened, Sung-yeon would never have reached his position. Sung-yeon ends up going berserk and punching the younger brother in the face, but then their parents arrive and beg them to stop. Then the older brother goes home, and while he's thinking about the things that have happened during the day, his cell phone starts ringing. It's his assistant telling him that there's an email with a very interesting proposal. As soon as the man goes to check it, he comes across the message that Miso had sent him, and now, I don't know if out of a tantrum or wanting to prove something to Young Jun, he agrees to work on the opening project as Morpheus. Meanwhile, Young Jun ended up going to his secretary Kim's house, and before he entered the apartment, she asked him to wait outside for a minute so she could tidy him up. In desperation, Miso ended up putting his clothes, which were on the chair, under the little cow he had won from the vice president. His secretary, Kim, takes care of the cut on his mouth, even though she doesn't know what caused it. To cheer him up, she invites him to eat some ramen that she has made. While he's cooking, the man keeps watching the things in Miso's room, and when the woman realizes that he's going to touch the little cow, she runs to stop him from seeing her clothes underneath, but ends up falling on top of him on the bed. Secretary Kim quickly starts to leave, and something unexpected happens. The man hugs her and tells her that he'd like to stay like this for a while and that he really wants to love her. Just as Miso starts to believe the man's words, he breaks the mood and says that this is the kind of thing that children's novel she likes says. Secretary Kim rushes into the kitchen to finish dinner, and although it's not what Young Jun is used to eating, he ends up enjoying it a lot. Soon after leaving Miso's house, the vice president goes to talk to President Park about what has just happened between him and his wife. And his friend says that when you're invited to eat ramen, it means that this meeting has a great significance, like someone telling the other person that they like them, indirectly. In fact, Young Jun ultimately lies to Yusik that this situation isn't about him and his secretary Kim, but about a cousin close to him who was having second thoughts. The next day, the vice president did something that had never happened in the 9 years they'd been together. He went to Miso's house to pick her up so they could go to work together. In the car, he surprised her once again. Young Jun bought coffee and something to eat so that his secretary Kim would be well fed for work. The man spent the whole day acting like a knight, something that didn't happen often. Meanwhile, the men's father goes to talk to the older man who started the fight. He wants to know when his son will apologize to Young Jun, because their mother is so upset by the situation that she can't sleep. The man also says that he shouldn't bother the youngest anymore, because Young Jun already has a lot on his plate with the company's projects, so if he gets upset, it will rub off on his employees too. In the next scene we see that Secretary Kim is called to reception because she has a visitor waiting, Sung-yeon. As soon as she arrives, the woman asks him how he knows her name and department, because she doesn't realize that the man is Morpheus. Miso just connects him to the memories of the times they crossed paths. However, Sung-yeon explains why she was there and that she was the one who called him. Embarrassed, Secretary Kim apologizes and the two go to an establishment to talk more while they eat. And Young Jun has lunch with President Park. The two talk about that supposed cousin of the vice president's, and his friend explains that the man should confess right away to the woman he likes, because they don't like being kept in the dark for too long. And after Miso and the writer meet, she gives him her real number this time. ashamed of what she did last time. At the company, the vice president is thinking about what his friend said and he doesn't know how to act like an ordinary man, since Miso once told him that this was her preference, so Young-jun asks his employees about restaurants that ordinary people would like to go to and in the end none of them can help him. The vice president had to surrender to searching the internet and when he finds the perfect restaurant, he invites her to meet him there at 8 p.m. Miso is excited for the dinner, until she ends up being affected by the comments made throughout the day about her always wearing the same clothes, so she decides to go to a store to buy a beautiful dress to wear in the evening. When she's on her way to the meeting, Sung-yeon calls his secretary Kim to tell her that he's already got her answer about whether or not to take part in the project, but that he wants to tell her in person. Although Miso told him she couldn't make it today because she already had an appointment, he insists on seeing her for 10 minutes and the woman ends up agreeing to meet him outside the restaurant where she made an appointment with the vice president. When he arrives, the two have a quick chat in which the writer tells him that he has agreed to take part in the inauguration and when the man goes to hand him his book, which has not yet been released, the vice president appears. The man looks furious. Young-jun takes Miso's hand and leads her inside. The two of them argue in the establishment. The vice president says he doesn't want Morpheus involved and if he's already said no, she should just obey. Secretary Kim is surprised by the sudden change in the treatment she's receiving from Young-jun and says that if it wasn't something important he wanted to say at dinner, she asks to leave and the man allows it. The vice president leaves the venue and goes straight to his older brother's house. As they talk, Sung-yeon says that she can see on the younger man's face that he's afraid that his secretary Kim will be stolen from him and, apparently, so will the company. However, Young-jun tells him that the man can take part in the inauguration and if he thought he had any influence over the group or Miso, he overestimated himself. The next day at work, Secretary Kim learns from the others that the vice president has ordered marketing to publicize the fact that Morpheus will be attending the inauguration. The woman is confused, because the last time she had seen the man, he had refused to get involved with the writer. So Miso goes to her boss's office and asks him never to cross the line again, or to make her rethink that he might be interested in her. After a while, Secretary Kim learns about another piece of information involving the vice president and the writer Morpheus. One of her co-workers tells her that the two are brothers and now the woman begins to understand a little of her boss's anger the day before. For once Young-jun had let slip that he wasn't a big fan of his older brother and some of the things the man had done to him throughout his life. Later, the two end up making up and Miso even goes to work in the vice president's office at night. At one point Young-jun gets up from his chair and comments on what she had said earlier, adding that he wants to make her think again. The man slowly approaches Secretary Kim and she even closes her eyes and pouts to receive a kiss. Just when we think it's finally going to happen, the man's mind flashes to the woman in the red heels and he pushes Kim's desk chair away in a huff, causing the woman to run to the other side of the room. Of course, Miso is embarrassed and says she'll go home and take the next day off. When she's home, Young-jun writes her a message apologizing for what happened and his secretary Kim plays along, saying that nothing happened between them. The next day, the woman is bored, doesn't know what to do and remembers having asked that reporter she went on a blind date with to do some research on kidnappings that took place in the 90s, so the woman texts him to see if he's found anything. Later, Miso bumps into Young-jun and he tells her that he's decided to take a day off and that he'll do whatever his secretary Kim wants. Miso takes the opportunity to take him to embarrassing places and puts him through some experiences he's never had to deal with, like riding on a crowded bus. Meanwhile, GA is looking for an apartment to rent that's closer to her work, so she won't be late anymore and the realtor explains that the woman can use the roof if she wants. There's a man who raises tomatoes and other things up there. The realtor adds that he's a bit of a cheapskate and even tells a piece of gossip that even though the rent is already cheap, he begged them to lower it a little more. When GA goes up to the roof to meet the man, she comes across GWI Nam, who works in his company and is known for having a lot of money and being very dedicated to his work. The woman promises that she won't tell anyone at work about her condition, but even so, GWI Nam keeps an eye on her for the next few days to make sure she doesn't let anything slip. Returning to Miso, she and the man have a very pleasant day, and at the end of it, they both spend some time trying to catch a stuffed animal in those machines with a claw. After several attempts, Young Jun is willing to buy the machine, but his secretary Kim explains that the fun is in catching them like an ordinary person. The next day, Miso receives a call from the reporter. The man has found something about a kidnapping involving one of the Lee brothers. Unfortunately, he can't tell exactly which of the two it is, as he only got the information that the child was in the 4th grade, but the two brothers did the school year together. Secretary Kim goes to work thinking about what she's just discovered, and on the way, President Park passes her and offers her a lift home. Being a close friend of the vice president, Miso asks him if he knows anything about the affair of one of the brothers, but Yusik says that over the years of friendship, Young Jun has never said anything about it. The man asks her why she's looking for this case, and Secretary Kim says that she has some memories of when she was little. She's locked in an empty house for a day or so and there's a boy near her. Miso believes that this boy is the vice president because of his phobia of hugging and the scar on his heel. President Park says that she could ask the vice president directly, but the woman believes that there must be a reason why he hasn't said anything before. The secretary, Kim, spends all day at work treating Young Jun differently, as if apologizing for not having recognized him before. In the next scene we see the vice president heading off to an important lunch. On the way he spots that teddy bear catching machine and decides to try it until he succeeds. When Young Jun returns to the company, he gives his secretary Kim what he took for her, and the woman's eyes fill with tears. Later, Jie tells Miso that she found out that Morphew was kidnapped when he was little, because they discovered a text he had written on an anonymous blog, venting about it. Secretary Kim asks her to read it, and as she looks through the letters, memories of the place come flooding back into her mind. When Young Jun comes out of his office, he notices Miso's surprised face and she decides to ask him about what happened, whether it was really his brother who was caught, not himself, and the vice president confirms that it was Sung-yeon. Secretary Kim decides to ask him about the scar on his ankle, and Young Jun says that he got it when he was young. After their conversation, Miso ends up bumping into Sung-yeon, who has gone to the company to sign a contract, and he takes the opportunity to apologize to Secretary Kim for not telling her earlier about being the vice president's brother. The two of them end up having a coffee together to talk about the time they spent together locked up in that empty house. Sung-yeon doesn't remember many things. Sometimes when you experience a big trauma like that, you can end up losing your memory of what happened. The man remembers that his brother jumped into the same class as him and stole his friends for himself. The boys made fun of him, according to Sung-yeon, and one day his younger brother took him somewhere and abandoned him, at which point the boy was kidnapped. Later, Miso goes to Young Jun's house to organize the books in his library. In the middle of her work, the woman finds a folder with several CVs of secretaries better prepared than her to work with the vice president. Secretary Kim begins to wonder why she was chosen out of so many better options, and Young Jun replies that it was simply because she was Miso. The woman then asks if he had met her before, and the man replies that it would be impossible. Secretary Kim always found it strange when she started at the company and her superior told her to apply for the job. At first she thought she wouldn't be selected and was surprised when she found out that she was. This doubt has always been in the back of her mind, the reason she was chosen, and in the midst of a situation where she still thinks Young Jun is the little boy she protected when she was caught, despite being told otherwise, Miso becomes even more confused. Should she believe in reason or her intuition? Later, when she is saying goodbye, the vice president asks her if the conversation she had with her brother was as good and enlightening as she had hoped. Secretary Kim says yes, and when Young Jong brings up the subject of them saying that all this happened because he left Sung-yeon behind, even though he doesn't remember anything, Miso replies that it's okay, they were children, and that if he doesn't remember, it's for the best. The woman confessed that she still hasn't come to terms with the fact that Sung-yeon was that little boy, and it's a bit strange for her. Secretary Kim left and we see that Young Jun didn't actually tell her the truth. since when we go back in time, it was the man who asked her superior to send her to apply for a secretary position, and when he introduced himself to the woman the first time, he already knew who she was. The next day, Miso goes to talk to President Park about what she discovered, that it wasn't the vice president who was caught as a child, but his older brother. The man comments that Secretary Kim seems to be disappointed by this information, but she tries to explain to him that it's nothing like that and that she would like the matter to remain between the two of them. In the course of the morning, Miso received a call inviting her to lunch, and before accepting, she warned the vice president about it, so that he wouldn't wait for her to eat, and said that GA would accompany him to the meeting, so that she could get used to the demand. At lunch, Sung-yeon asked her what she wanted to do when she met him, and Secretary Kim explained that she didn't have anything in mind, she just wanted to find him, she didn't intend to date and marry him, as the man is thinking. Despite this, the little boy who got stuck with her is still her first love, but after many years, it doesn't mean that they're going to get involved. As the meeting is winding down, the two bump into the vice president outside the establishment. The man asks to speak to his brother alone, so Miso leaves. And their conversation is nothing but teasing about who will get the woman in the end. Meanwhile, in the car, Young-jun learns that later Secretary Kim will meet up with his older brother again, and the two of them will go to the approximate location of the kidnapping. The man asks the woman not to go, as there are things that could hurt her when she remembers, but she insists that she wants to find out certain things, regardless of what it will do to her. And we see that GA still has to deal with GWI Nam. The man is making sure that she doesn't open her mouth about his financial situation, and so he's going to a workshop where the head office staff are going, which isn't nice, as the man makes her tense with all this observation. Returning to Miso, she meets up with Sung-yeon after work, and the man picks her up in his vehicle. The vice president ended up canceling his appointments and inviting President Park to accompany him and listen to him vent. On the way there, we see that his friend is great at protecting his feelings, because when he sees Sung-yeon talking to Secretary Kim outside the car, he closes Young-jun's eyes so that he doesn't see and get angry. Meanwhile, when they are in the area similar to the one where the crime took place, Miso talks about the few things she remembers, like when the little boy took her hand when they ran away and led her to her house. Secretary Kim called this little boy Appa, which is the way they refer in Korea to an older brother, or an older friend who is very close, and in romantic relationships, it can be used to refer to your boyfriend. Sung-yeon asks her to start calling him that, so that she can help him remember more about those terrible days. In the next scene we see the president with Yoo-sik. The man tells him that he needs to work up the courage and declare himself to Miso so that he doesn't lose her to his older brother, and the two of them stop flirting. President Park also reveals that he knew Young-jun was using the excuse that he was his cousin to ask for advice. Returning to Miso, she hands Sung-yeon a diary she made for the little boy when she was little, telling him about her day-to-day life and some memories of what happened when they were caught. The man says some things that may sound a little strange, like being grateful to Young-jun for abandoning him and him being kidnapped because of it, because in the end he met the woman. Her feeling about it doesn't seem to be that. In my opinion as a viewer, he's romanticizing a trauma too much, so much so that his secretary Kim is a little surprised to hear these words. But no more so than Young-jun when Sung-yeon takes her to meet the vice president, and as they say goodbye, she uses the word Appa. Young-jun and Miso start a conversation in an establishment, which sounds a bit like an argument. The man tells her that she should bury the memories she's struggling to remember, so that she doesn't live in the past. And he says that this upsets the man she's flirting with, in this case him. Young-jun left his secretary Kim speechless, and when he went to say goodbye to her, he said that before he had proposed that the woman marry him, because he didn't want her to quit, but now the man really likes her and wants to build something. However, Miso says she doesn't think now is the best time to start a relationship and dismisses him. The next day, the office group gets together to go in a vehicle to the workshop. GWI Nam was the one who lost out on this trip, as Sara tried to please him by feeding him and ended up spilling sauce on the only suit the man has. And Miso ended up discovering with her colleagues that inviting someone to eat ramen is a way of indirectly letting them know that you want to seduce them, so Secretary Kim starts to feel ashamed, remembering the time she called the vice president to eat the dish. Later, the group decides they're going to have fun and Miso tells them that they should do just that, because the program was just something to deliver to the company. In fact, they're there to have fun. However, when they leave the house, they find Young-jun on the premises, which comes as a surprise to everyone, including Secretary Kim, and unfortunately now everyone will have to work, following what was in the program. At one point, the vice president reveals to Miso that the real reason he's there is so that at the end of the workshop the two of them can stop flirting and become boyfriend and girlfriend. In the next scene, we see that the group ends up doing a tape hunt made up of couples. Of course the vice president got Secretary Kim and then they split up, the winner getting a tablet that Young-jun added to the prize and a gift card. GWI Nam is the one who is most determined to win, not that he needs the device that much, but selling it guarantees him a good amount of money that he wasn't expecting, but his double GA doesn't understand how important it is to him. Meanwhile, Miso received a call from Sung-yeon while she was with the vice president, so Young-jun decided to pick up the cell phone and reply that Secretary Kim is busy at the moment. The vice president has decided that he will deal with what is to come with his beloved's curiosity about the past and that he will get over it so that the two of them can be together as a couple. So the first thing the woman wants to know is why he pushed her away when they were about to kiss, and the man is honest. He says that when he closes his eyes, from time to time Young-jun sees the ghost of a woman wanting to grab him and that scares him. However, as his secretary Kim was starting to get worried and asked if there had been any trauma in his life, the vice president made a joke about seeing a ghost at that moment to lighten the mood. As soon as the two of them get back to the house, everyone in the group is already at the table having dinner, and when they go to make more meat for them, the food has run out, so all that's left to eat is ramen, and although Miso is very much in the mood for a barbecue, he has to make do with the noodles. The next day, Young-jun leaves the workshop to close with a big brand in the company, and instead of taking his secretary Kim with him, he tells her to enjoy the place with the rest of the group and rest. However, if she wants to go to his house later, there will be a present waiting for her, and Miso confirms that she will go. In the next scene we see that the man is planning to have a barbecue in his garden to satisfy his lover's cravings and invites President Park to join him at the market, but at the end of the shopping, Young-jun dismisses his friend, who thought he was going to take part in the barbecue, and gets a bit upset about it. Later, Miso arrives at the vice president's house and loves the surprise, but they end up having to eat pizza in the end, as it was Young-jun's first time looking after meat and he ended up letting them all burn. At one point, the man goes to wipe his beloved's face, and when they get close, it looks like a kiss is about to happen. But unfortunately, when he closes his eyes, Young-jun remembers that woman and can't go any further. The situation becomes increasingly complicated when President Park shows up and catches them in that situation. Embarrassed, Secretary Kim says goodbye and rushes off. The next day, Miso ends up taking the elevator with Yusik, and she tries to explain to him that nothing is going on between her and the vice president. Changing the subject, the woman asks if President Park has noticed that Young-jun has a scar on one of his ankles, and Yusik replies that the man actually has one on both of them, because when they were younger and getting ready in the locker room, he noticed it. President Park comments that the way they are, it's like he's been tied up or something, and explains that when you tighten them too much with a rope or something, there's a low concentration of blood there which can leave marks in the future. The man even thought, when his secretary Kim commented on the kidnapping, that Young-jun might have been one of the children, but as soon as the woman told him about his older brother, Yusik dismissed the possibility. We cut to a scene where we see Sara paying for a little gaffe at the office. President Park's secretary has brought some macarons to the main office, and as the woman wasn't there, she left 3 on her desk. As soon as Sara arrives, she asks her colleagues who left her that treat, and one of them says that it was someone who really likes her. The woman immediately guesses that it's the vice president's driver and secretary, Mr. Young, so she sends him a message thanking him and saying that she'll appreciate them. A little time goes by and Sarah finds out that she was Yusuk's secretary, so she's ashamed of what she sent to the man. GA also has to deal with something. She and GWI Nam won the ribbon race, so the woman goes to him to hand over the prizes, and the man is unpleasant as usual, saying that she's being unfair to win one, because he was the one who found 2 of the 3 ribbons, so he deserved more. GWI Nam also says that when she orders food at home, to take half of it back to him, so it won't be a waste. In the next scene, Sung-yeon tells his mother about finding out that Miso was with him during his childhood trauma, and the woman is surprised, because when they were called to the police station, the boy was alone. So Madam Choi decided to call her secretary Kim and ask her to come to her house. There, the woman asks Miso to tell her in detail what she remembers, and Secretary Kim tells her a little about the place and how a boy who was there before her, a little older than her, comforted her when she was afraid. Madam Choi asks if he didn't feel cold in that place, because the boy, who is now a man, is very sensitive to the cold. The woman tells her that her son was wearing a cardigan made especially for the boy by his designer friend, and that he was the only one to have received something like this, apart from the designer's own children. Miso asks her how Young Jun came to lose his childhood memories and discovers that this happened during the period when the crime took place. The boy was drinking coffee one day and simply fainted. As soon as he woke up, he said he couldn't remember anything else. Then Sung-yeon appears and says that he will accompany her to the exit, only to change first, and the woman notices that there are no scars on his ankles like there were on his brother's. Outside, Sung-yeon says that he can't wait for winter to arrive, as he loves the cold, and this is another thing that Secretary Kim finds strange, as his mother has just said that her son, who was caught, was sensitive to the cold. Miso's mind is getting more and more confused and pointing out that Young Jun was the child with her in that horrible place, but the man denied it every time she asked. Speaking of the vice president, the two ran into each other at his parents' house, and the man went to pick her up, but his secretary Kim had already left. Young Jun ended up finding the diary she had given to his older brother, and with that, some memories started to come back to him. Later, the vice president went to Miso's house. He wanted to see her and also deliver a box full of caramel candies, to make up for the fact that earlier the man had eaten her last one. The next day, the inauguration of Young Jun's company's arts center and the lecture in which his brother will reveal himself as the writer Morpheus arrive. While the lecture is taking place, Miso notices the vice president enter the auditorium, and when she gets up to meet him, Sung-yeon, who was being interviewed, says that he has recently found his true love again and that he will dedicate himself to protecting her, just as he did when he was little and they went through a difficult time together. After receiving this declaration of love, Miso goes after the vice president, who left the premises after hearing his older brother's words. Secretary Kim tells Young Jun that the things Sung-yeon said and when he saw the man holding her hand earlier were all a misunderstanding, and she wants to make things clear so that the vice president doesn't misunderstand and end up walking away. Then Miso reveals that she likes him, so the man pulls her into a hug and then is about to give her a kiss, when he remembers that woman again, but this time Secretary Kim isn't going home in the mood and she approaches him to give him a kiss, thus breaking the trauma of Young Jun, who won't stop kissing his girlfriend. Afterwards, Young Jun takes Miso home and proposes to her again, but now he adds that she should accept as soon as possible. The next day, something happened that had never happened before. The vice president was so relaxed that things were working out between him and his secretary Kim, that he ended up falling asleep in a meeting. In taking advantage of this, President Park called her in to see something funny. Despite being asleep, the man answers everything that is asked anyway. Over the course of the day, Young Jun realizes that he doesn't feel comfortable dating Miso now, that she does the same things as before, such as pouring his water, preparing his snacks and so on, so he asks her not to become a bad boyfriend, that she doesn't do anything other than her real work duties as a secretary. Today wasn't a good day for our dear President Park, as he was on his way to a meeting when he saw his ex-wife on the street smiling with another man, and this shook Yusik, who still has feelings for her. Near the end of the workday, Miso asks the vice president not to give her any more special treatment, because being in front of him, always making him comfortable with everything, was her job for 9 years, and asking him to stop now doesn't make the woman feel good. The conversation between them ends up leaving their relationship a little shaken. It was the first couple's quarrel between the two. Meanwhile, Ji ended up receiving some tomatoes as a gift from her neighbor Gwi Nam, as an apology for the man having taken her fan earlier, thinking that someone had thrown it away. So the woman decided to be a good neighbor too and sent him half of the food she had ordered to eat, but as soon as she handed it over to Gwi Nam, she regretted it, because right away the man complained about the flavors she had ordered and told her his preferences for next time. Returning to our beautiful couple, in the evening the vice president goes to Miso's house, with food from the restaurant she's used to going to with her sisters, and Secretary Kim thanks him for coming to her home. The two end up making up. However, a problem arises when Miso's sisters show up and the woman ends up hiding her boyfriend in the closet so that they don't see him. Unfortunately, this is how the man ended up hearing the bad things his girlfriend said about him while they weren't yet in a relationship, because Secretary Kim said that the vice president was there, which is why there were 2 plates on the table, so the two of them opened the list of things the man has wrong with him, and inside the cupboard Youngjun is squirming listening to everything. Despite everything he's heard, when the vice president is released from the closet, he says that he can't get angry with his girlfriend because she's so beautiful. The next day, Secretary Kim is doing her job, when she receives a message that makes her nervous. Sung-yeon goes to meet her later, so that they can talk and he can apologize for having made a statement without the woman's openness. Before answering him, Miso shows the message to her boyfriend who says that she should meet him and that he trusts her, so Secretary Kim says that she'll put an end to this situation with Sung-yeon anyway. We then see the two of them meeting. The man doesn't take too kindly to Miso putting an end to their relationship, even more so after finding out that it has to do with Youngjun, so Sung-yeon starts to get worked up. However, the vice president suddenly appears on the scene, having predicted that his brother would act like this, and tells him not to chase after Secretary Kim or bother her anymore. The man says that if he sees him talking nonsense in front of the woman one more time, he won't let it go, even if she is one of his family. In the next scene we see that Youngjun has taken his lover for a drive, so that they can cool off, and the man ends up taking a piece of clothing from the car so that she can warm up. Miso ends up commenting that the color is very beautiful, so the vice president decides to tell her that since he was a little boy, he has received pieces made especially for him from a designer friend of his mother. At this point, Secretary Kim adds one more thing to her list of why she believes the man is the boy from her childhood. The two of them get into the car for a while so that Youngjun can rest. Since he was yawning and his thoughts were racing, Miso decides to test something and calls him by the name she used to call the little boy, since she recently remembered it in one of her dreams, and it's Song Hyan Appa. As soon as Secretary Kim says it, the man answers the call and she gets the confirmation she was hoping for. Soon Miso is bombarding Youngjun with questions, whether his name has been changed, why he answered her call, but he just says that he heard her voice and answered, as usual. What did you think of these episodes? I hope you enjoyed the summary. Leave your suggestions in the comments and subscribe. If you liked the video, like it and share it to help me. Until next time.